Good evening and welcome to the budget debate. This is a special edition of the India Development Debate and we get you the verdict on the budget. I'm Supriya Shrinate and let's take you through a quick lowdown of what the budget did. Farmers first and the middle class next. That's the sum and substance of the Modi government's last budget presented by the interim Finance Minister Piyush Goyal. Setting the sight firmly on the rural voter ahead of general elections, the centre announced a 6,000 rupee a year dole-out to the small farmers holding up to 2 hectares of land. There is something for the salaried too, as the budget has given tax rebates for individuals earning up to an annual income of 5 lakh rupees. Nothing much for Indian industry, as there is no word on a promised reduction in corporate tax in line with the glide path. Considering the higher allocation to the farm sector and social security schemes, there are some giveaways on the fiscal front, but the fiscal deficit target for the next year now set at 3.4%. Markets reacted rather indifferently to Goyal's maiden budget despite a solid start, with bank stocks taking a heavy knock. Experts and Dalal Street veterans said that the emphasis on the agriculture sector and the middle class was on the expected lines, although economists say the real impact on the budget proposal on the fiscal could be much higher than budget projections. Government's final pitch before polls and how does this impact you, the economy and your budget is a big discussion today right here on the India Development Debate, the budget edition. And joining us is a stellar panel of guests right here. For the verdict, I've got Swaminathan Iyer, our consulting editor with us. We've got Jayant Sinha, MP and of course Minister of State for Civil Aviation, represents the BJP. MV Rajiv Gowda, spokesperson of the Congress Party. And of course, Yogendra Yadav, founder and national president of the Swaraj India political party. So thank you, each one of you, for being with us. And Swami, I will begin with you. The speech ended at close to 1 p.m. and so many hours later, the question is, 10 hours later nearly, what is the verdict? Is this a budget for elections and will this help BJP win the polls?
This is unquestionably an election budget. I would say all interim budgets are election budgets, but this is the mother of all election budgets because it's not interim. It's much more than that. It is aiming to benefit 120 million farmers. It's aiming to benefit maybe 100 million guys through laborers through a pension. There are 30 million people to be benefited on a middle class tax break. So it is spreading its net very far and wide. The connection with the elections is obvious. At the same time, it needs to be said that we are no longer in an era where the center has all the money and the states do not. The states have more money today than the center. So in fact, you will have a situation today where despite this Kisan Samman program of Mr. Narendra Modi, 6,000 rupees per year per farmer, KCR in Telangana will say, I am giving 8,000 rupees per acre per farmer. In Odisha, Mr. Naveen Patnaik will say, I am giving 10,000 rupees to 12,500 rupees per year, not only to farm owners, but to tenants, sharecroppers and landless people. You come forward with new pension scheme that a lifetime you will earn 3,000. In Rajasthan, Gehlot has just come out with a program saying, I am giving a public pension of 3,000 rupees a month. So, while this particular budget clearly is an election budget, it does not have the space to itself. There are state governments coming out with their own schemes, so there is going to be a lot of competition between the BJP and the others. So while this is an election budget, it is not necessarily an election winning budget. The battle is still very much on.
Here is that this is an election budget. It may not help the BJP go through the polls quite remarkably. But let me take this across to the Treasury benches. And Mr. Sinha, this was a make or break budget for the BJP. Former Finance Minister Padappan Chidambaram dubbed the budget as an account for votes instead of a vote for account. Can you dismiss the fact, given the number of boxes that the budget ticks, the agriculture, the vocal middle class, pensions for the unorganized, given all of that, can you dismiss the fact that you had elections in mind while making this budget?
Supriya, obviously we have elections in mind when we are dealing with an interim budget, and which is the last budget that the government is presenting. Every government does that. Every budget is also a political budget because we are a democratically elected government. So obviously we want to make sure that what we are doing is helping the people. So all budgets are political, and then the budgets that come at the end are obviously election budgets as well. But really the way you have to look at this budget is as icing on the cake. In Hindi we would say Sone pe Suhaga. And the reason for that is that the cake has already been built over the last 4.5, 5 years. All the policies that we've done, the extensive set of measures that we've undertaken for the rural sector, for the middle class, for the informal sector, all of those have already started to yield very significant dividends. They're already helping all of these sections of society. And with these additional measures that we brought forward to deal with some of the challenges of the day, I think are really going to seal the election for us. With us now well positioned, we think that we will be able to go to the people with a tremendous amount of confidence based on the work that we've done over the last 4 or 5 years, as well as what we presented in this budget, which sets a forward-looking direction. There were 10 dimensions that Piyush ji laid out as well, which really paint a vision. So all in all, it's a very, very appetizing cake.
No, absolutely. You say it's an appetizing thing. You say it's the cherry on the cake. But let me see if your opponents feel the same way. And both Rajiv Gowda and Yogendra Yadav, I have questions, the same question for both of you. Let me begin with Yogendra Yadav. No doubt it is a political budget aimed to contain the discontent and woo the voters back. In some sense, do you believe Mr. Modi will be able to do that? There are about 100 days left for the elections. Implementation is always going to be the key and, is going to be crucial and the key to the success of some of what he wants to do with this budget. But do you believe this has the potential to, or can at least recapture imagination and the narrative? Mr. Yadav?
I don't think so, but that's not because it is a political budget. There's nothing wrong in being political budget. Governments are political, and there's nothing wrong in an electoral budget. If it was last year's budget, which was a full budget of this government, if it was entirely electoral, that's perfectly all right. The problem is that this is the 6th budget of this government. To my mind, in a democracy, you have a 5-year term. You can do 5 full budgets. You cannot do 6 budgets. And the convention in our country is that your first budget is 3/4 of a budget and your last budget is 1/4 of a budget. That's what it is. But you cannot suddenly start making that 1/4 into one full budget. I do not know what its implications in the long run would be. This, to my mind, definitely crosses the red line. What was needed today was a comprehensive outcome budget. This is an exercise happening for 7-8 years. 2 years ago, the exercise was fine-tuned. It's a very good document possibility now, outcome, output budget. I was hoping that the government would present those figures. And this is not just text, this is not poetry. These are hard numbers that needed to be produced. Sadly, they were not produced. That's what disappoints me. All right, you say in this budget, there are some emergency crises that we need to handle. I can think of 2. One, unemployment. That's as big as it gets. Maybe we should talk about it. But that's something the finance minister did not even acknowledge. In a country where every opinion poll shows unemployment is top of the chart, where an SSO survey, CMI survey, everything shows unemployment is high. The finance minister does not acknowledge it, let alone solving. On the farmers' front, which is the second crisis, yes, the finance minister acknowledges that there is a problem. He comes up with what he thinks is a solution, except that it's a joke. It's a joke not just because the amount is so low, not merely because the really disadvantaged farmers are excluded, but it's also because this retrospective application from December, that's clearly sending a message to the voters, take this money and vote for us.
Okay, Mr. Yadav, that's a very important point that you're talking about, and I have that question in mind. Let me just get done with the opening arguments, and then, of course, as you and I both understand, the focus will be on agriculture and what has been done there. But Rajiv Gowda, very quickly, whatever has been announced begins from the 1st of April. Do you believe this was in response to how you tried to stump the BJP with your minimum income guarantee scheme? And I'm going to discuss minimum income guarantee versus what's being done with the agriculture package next. But all I'm trying to say is there competition to capture the popular imagination? And today, has Mr. Modi at least come back to the match?
See, Mr. Modi's unique contribution, his unique intellectual property is something called a jumla. An election promise that is not going to be fulfilled. And that's really something that you see this budget entirely packed with. if you look at the kinds of numbers that have been thrown around, basically these are numbers that actually don't turn out to be the reality. I'm not even talking about the two big announcements, the farmer income support as well as the middle class tax rebate. Take the 60,000 for Manrega. Now, just a few days ago, a whole all-party delegation from Karnataka, led by a union cabinet minister, we went to the rural development minister saying, please release Manrega funds. You're not releasing them to states on time, and as a result, people are getting discouraged, and the most vulnerable are getting discouraged and staying away from this scheme, which is really the opposite of what we intended that scheme to be when we introduced it. So typically, you will see numerous announcements, lots of headlines, but you must ask a simple question: show me the money. Where is the money backing these particular programs? It's not there. And so that's one part of this whole story. And that's something that every government with these kinds of announcements will have to pay attention to.
Okay, Mr. Gowda, hold that thought, and before I go headlong into the agriculture bit, I have to ask Mr. Sinha, because he's somebody who not just understands the political part of the budget, but also understands the fiscal and the economic implications of what it tries to import here. And Mr. Sinha, will you concede that the budget has sacrificed what many people say the economy at the altar of politics? And I'm going to only point out to the fiscal glide path. Yes, you haven't deviated too much from 3.3%. You will end the year at 3.4%. I also think growth revisions that have happened will come in handy, and we have a different discussion happening there. But, 3.4% for next fiscal, the target was to get, and I'm not just blaming you wholly for this, the target was to get at 3% FRBM levels in 2008. We're in 2019, we still haven't gotten to 3%, and we won't next year either. So the glide path has been very elusive, and will you at least concede that?
I will concede that we should be getting to 3% as quickly as possible. That is, of course, our target as well, and we also need to be reducing debt as a percent of GDP as much as possible. That's what, of course, the Fiscal Commission also laid out. That is absolutely our approach. And in fact, what we have demonstrated through this budget, that our fiscal consolidation objective, our fiscal prudence remains undiminished in all ways. And that, in fact, is what the markets are also telling us. Sadly, my friends from the Congress have adopted this Goebbels-like propaganda style, where they think that by constantly spreading lies and talking lies all the time, it can be converted into truth. But unfortunately, that doesn't work with the Indian public. That doesn't work in terms of the kind of rhetoric that they're putting out. The reality is that the numbers that we've presented are realistic. The assumptions that we made in terms of revenue growth, tax collections, disinvestment are all very realistic. They're very much in line with what the historical realities have been, and therefore the 3.4% number is a very solid number, and which is why we are seeing the positive reaction in the markets. Yields haven't gone up, capital markets have gone up, stock market has gone up. So if indeed this was some big jumla that Mr. Gowda is talking about, we wouldn't have seen the positive reaction in the markets. Now, with respect to the glide path issue, and the fact that we haven't achieved it in 2008. Remember, what we inherited from the Congress was an economy that was absolutely in the ditch. We had an economy with a fiscal deficit of 5.5%. We brought it down from 5.5% right down to 3.4%. And of course, we are going through a major transformation in agriculture, which we will be addressing through all of the different policies that we brought.
Right.
So the glide path relative to what we inherited, relative to the mess that the Congress left, has been outstanding, and that's what we're delivering on, and that's the thumbs up that we're getting from both the debt markets as well as the equity markets.
Okay, you've also been greatly blessed with oil, and let's not lose sight of that. But give me a minute, because Congress was blessed with great exports growth. But let me go across to the elephant in the room, and that is the Agri Package. Yogendra Yadav, it's only fair that I begin this round with you. Vulnerable farmers, small land holding of up to 2 hectares, to receive direct income support of 6,000 annually, funded 100% by the government of India. I mean, who seemingly can quarrel with that? This will be directly transferred in bank accounts. It is modeled on perhaps clearly the Telangana's Raitu Bandhu. The question is, Will 500 be enough? And you already espoused the view that it won't be. And do you not, however, concede that at least from a blanket plain Jane farm loan waiver that every budget keeps talking about, this is at least talking about a step in the right direction? There is at least an attempt to do something which is far more comprehensive than just waive off loans.
I would have agreed with you if this government had done something like this in its first, second or third year with a clear perspective to say, all right now we can afford only 6,000, we'll increase it gradually and we would address it. When it comes as not an 11th hour response, but actually as an afterthought, after they've actually crossed the line when they could have done anything properly by any norms, then you begin to see, okay, what's happening here? You lose 3 elections, farmers are angry, and you really scratch your head hard and say, what can we do, what can we do? Okay, let's throw this at them. And what is the proof you get? The proof is that in the month of February 2019, you suddenly get so anxious about the plight of the farmers that you retrospectively bring in something in a budget about the previous budget. You could have announced it in September, you could have announced it in July. You say, no, now we have to release it. And the first installment must reach the the farmers before election. What are we doing here? So I hope I'm not reading too much into it. That's quite obvious. To my mind, that is where part of the problem is. The second problem, as we know, is the most vulnerable farmers, the tenant farmers, sharecroppers, are completely excluded by definition. So the idea that they are addressing the most vulnerable farmers is not true. To my mind, the real problem is the government has been talking, and that's one positive point of this. The positive point is that there is an acknowledgement of the fact that farmers' incomes are in a crisis, that they need some direct support. There can be opinions, and I personally would be completely open to thinking, is MSP the best route? Is income support the best route? To my mind, it's not either or. They have to be supplemented. Various routes have to be brought together. But now that we have the minister with us, can I ask one question about agriculture, which I have asked the chairman of Niti Aayog, I asked CEO of Niti Aayog 1 hour ago, I asked Deputy State Minister for Finance. I've got poetry, I've got angry responses, but I didn't get the answer to it. The government says that they are going to double farmers' income in 6 years. Lovely. We are already at the end of 3 years. It was announced in February 16. Now it's 3 years, so we are at the midpoint. Can someone please tell me how much has the income of farmers gone up in these 3 years? Data, not poetry, not angry political responses. Mr. Sinha is reasonable and he knows his economics. Can someone in this government please give me the data?
Right. Okay, Mr. Sinha, 3 years after you had announced doubling farm income, will you give us an assessment where you are? And I agree with Yogen Yadav that you're reasonable and you will not resort to poetry.
I can resort to poetry, but I will not. I will answer with some facts. First, with respect to the doubling of farmer income, how much has happened in the last 3 years? I don't have the numbers in front of me. If Mr. Yadav had provided me this question ahead of time, I would have come armed with the numbers and I would have supplied him the numbers. But what I will tell him is 2 or 3 important things to address the very legitimate concerns that he has. Number one, we have a huge number of schemes that are now in process, which we think are going to give a tremendous boost to agricultural incomes. One of those, which we announced only a few months ago, was the 1.5 times the input prices MSP scheme. And that, of course, is being implemented right now. And as we implement that, of course, farmer incomes will, in a very durable and robust way, go up. But it takes time to implement that. So that's one very important scheme. The second very important scheme that's happening is the combination of the state plus the central programs to provide income support, to provide resources to farmers so that they have the necessary seeds, fertilizers, implements to be able to raise their income. So that is also going to go into effect. Third, we've increased the amount of credit that they can take through the Kisan credit card. We are providing them with irrigation, we are providing them with electricity, we are providing them with roads, we are providing them with cold storage. All of these major efforts are underway right now. And I think as a result of that, we will see a big boost to rural incomes over the next 3, 4, 5 years. So that is one aspect of it. Now there's an equally important aspect of it also which Mr. Yadav should consider. And that is that when we are talking about income in rural areas, we are not just talking about pure agricultural income. And when I say pure agricultural income, I mean that from crops. Because what is happening is that horticulture is going up in a big way, fruits are going up in a big way, what we're doing in dairying is increasing farmer income, murgi palan, bakri palan, all those are additional sources of income. So those are also contributing to rural incomes. And then the final part of this is that there are a whole host of agri-related sources of income that are also popping up, which are in services, Anganwadi, Kendra, Sevikas, and so on and so forth, that are also adding to rural incomes. When you pull all of that together, and I'm giving just the conceptual aspect of it because I don't have the hard numbers with me right now, but I think when you add it all together, you will notice that farmers are able to supplement the incomes in many different ways, and that's why we are very sure of the doubling of farmer incomes.
Okay. I think Yogendra Yadav wants to come in, and
can I just say one thing,
at the risk
Supriya?
of this discussion getting hijacked by the agriculture part of it, and I think it's only fair that we do. But Yogendra Yadav, even as you make your point, if I may quickly come up with a question of my own, and then of course you can rebut and make a point to what Mr. Sinha said. The opposition says the sum is very paltry. The opposition says, what about the landless farmers and rural labourers? The opposition has also cited, and perhaps rightly so, the lack of land records. But if we actually go on to see 1.08 hectares is the average operational holding in the agriculture sector. So prima facie, this could benefit a large number of people. And as per the government documents, is it true that 95% of computerization of land records is done? So identifying will perhaps not be the problem. And the question then is, how soon can that 6,000 go? And I agree with you, doing it retrospectively is not the right thing.
Supriya, now if I can come back, the question I had posed to Sinhaji was not a casual question about some data on some scheme of the government. Obviously, you don't remember all the figures. We are talking about the flagship scheme of the most touted thing. And since Mr. Sinha says his government doesn't believe in spreading lies, repeating lies, would it not be a very obvious question? And it's quite possible he doesn't have the answer right now. Why is it that the CEO of Niti Aayog doesn't have an answer? Why is it that the chairman of Niti Aayog doesn't have an answer? Why is it that the agriculture minister doesn't have an answer? Is it possible that this question is something no one wants to answer? Because the answer is very, very embarrassing. The target that doubling of farmers' income committee had found out was that you needed to raise it 10.4% every year. And you are nowhere close to that. Is that an unreasonable question to ask? Shouldn't the government, when they announce something as big as that, should you not have annual landmarks? Should you not say in year 1 we would reach here, in year 2 you would reach here? Are they not reasonable questions? On the point that Supriya you made, I think it's fair to say that farmers who are between 0 to 2 hectares constitute a very large proportion of Indian farmers, and if they can be helped, that would indeed be a very significant contribution. We should not forget the fact, however, that those who have more than 2 hectares, especially in the rain-fed dry areas of India, they are not rich people either. In Bundelkhand, Marathwada, Vidarbha, if you have more than 5 acres, you are still a very poor farmer. They are excluded. But more importantly, if you are an actual cultivator, but you are doing it on lease or on shared cropping, and you are really the most vulnerable farmer of this country, you would be definitionally excluded from this. That's something we should worry about.
Okay. Fair point indeed. But before I go any forward, I think it's only fair that I get Rajiv Gora back into the discussion. And I think your party president, Mr. Chidambaram, tried to stump the opposition by talking about this minimum income guarantee scheme at the start of this week, and it kind of almost seemed to be setting the political narrative there. I know you've criticized what the BJP has done for farmers on account of lack of records, on account of the sum being very paltry. I hope you've worked out the details, because a minimum income guarantee scheme is not just going to be a drain on the fisc, which it will be, but many people believe that the BJP has stolen the thunder back by announcing this in the budget today, and that too retrospectively.
See, we're not worried about who steals the thunder, who steals something else. Our basic aim is to make sure that the people who are most vulnerable in India, who are not actually covered by these programs, are actually given that social safety net, from which that floor, that humane floor, from which they can build to achieve their aspirations. So therefore, we have not excluded the tenant farmer, the sharecropper. We have not excluded the urban poor. We are basically focusing on working out the calculations to raise the resources to create as large a component as possible to ensure that the poorest of the poor are lifted up. Now, that's something that is not there in today's budget announcement, and basically that tells you where this government's heart is and where their priorities are. And therefore, I don't think anyone's stealing anyone's thunder. Let me also just point out a couple of points that, my friend Mr. Sinha used the word Goebbelsian. That's something that if he looks in the mirror, he will understand what that means. But the basic point is, he talked about achieving divestment numbers. How has the government achieved its disinvestment targets? Is LIC buying some other part of the government actually disinvestment into the private sector? None of those targets have been achieved. And so across the board, you must remember that this government's numbers just cannot be believed. So Goebbels would have been very proud of Mr. Goyal. They would have been very proud of Mr. Jaitley, of Mr. Jayant Sinha, Mr. Modi, of course. Goebbels would have hugged him and said, brother. Okay? So basically, this is a government whose numbers are just not believable. They've just come up with some new set of numbers saying the demonetization year saw 8.2% growth. Where did they come up with that? How do they expect anyone to actually believe them anymore? The statisticians have resigned because they cannot take the suppression of data any further. So that's the kind of illusory, make-believe, smoke and mirrors world that they have before us. And it's actually imperative that the media and every one of us points out the truth and shows the people that these guys are just into jumlas day in and day out.
No, just give me a minute. And I think you're pointing me in a direction that I thought I will go a little later in the show. But since you say it, let me go headlong into this. And Swami, we've had this chat yesterday. We had this chat earlier this morning too. The fact that the budget is one exercise is all very good. The fact that there are questions being raised on the data that's coming out. 8.2% growth in a demonetization year in fiscal year 17, and the data gets revised by 1.1 percentage point. The fact that we continue to grow very well in fiscal year 18, people have raised questions of the credibility of the data. Are you someone who's worried about what's happening on that front, and especially given the developments that we did see in the National Statistical Commission, whether it was the jobs data that is being... Because the truth is, how can we have the lowest level of job creation in a year which sees one of the highest levels of growth?
I agree. I definitely think, there is something that's stinking. There is a rot in the statistical state of affairs which needs to be corrected. The very fact that you had these independent statisticians saying, we were supposed to vet the stuff, we were supposed to have an advanced thing, we are not being given any work and hence we are resigning. I mean, this does not speak well of the government. It speaks of grave institutional erosion. It's a strong suggestion of some kind of manipulation to make the figures look better. And I don't know why people bother to manipulate it, because frankly, no voter is going to change his vote because of what appears in the statistics. The Reserve Bank itself had estimated that demonetization would cost the economy at least 0.5 to 0.75% of GDP. RBI. In other words, you are saying that without this, the GDP growth that year would have been 9%? Is there anything else that is showing up in bank credit, industrial production, anything else that shows that? Yes, there was some increase in agricultural output after 2 drought years, but agriculture is only 15% of GDP. It can't account for it. So I do agree that there is now considerable question as to whether people are fudging the GDP data. And I think the government really needs to have a completely independent National Statistical Commission, independent members, and to regain credibility
Swami,
on
that's a very important point that you're talking about. And before I get Mr. Jayant Sinha to come back and defend that, I will get a quick word in from Yogendra Yadav as well. And Mr. Yadav, the fact that a lot of people have been worried about what is now being called a draft report on jobs, the fact that on the nth hour you revise GDP numbers, which obviously makes some elbow room for fiscal space even in this budget. In some sense, things are not adding up. Anecdotal evidence, for instance, on the ground doesn't seem to suggest that we could have grown at the levels at which we did during demonetization. Jobs were disrupted, economic activity was stalled. I mean, how could we have grown at 8.2%? And are you telling us that if it wasn't for demonetization, we could have actually grown at 9%? And are you in the camp that has issues with data?
We've had a statistical system that India can duly take pride in. It is internationally acknowledged as one of the best statistical systems in the world, and we are about to wreck it. This government has really taken it to a lowest level. And what's happening in the National Statistical Commission? I mean, do you think the whole world doesn't watch us? What does it do to our institutional credibility? Tomorrow, who would believe our figures? Something is terrible, something stinks here. Swami is absolutely right. And the least we can do is not to fudge these things. The least we can do is to respect these institutions. On unemployment, you do not need such big surveys. Step out of your studio, step out of your home, and you can see unemployment is the biggest issue in the country today. And that is something to which this government must respond. I must stop and leave at this stage.
All right. On that note, we'll let Mr. Yogendra Yadav go, but I will continue with Jayant Sinha, and I think it's only fair that we give the minister ample time and an effort to defend what is being alleged. I don't want to use a very harsh word like data fudging that some of our panelists have used, sir, but it is discomforting to imagine that data is not corroborating with anecdotal evidence on the ground. Anecdotal evidence seems to suggest there has been jobs that have been extinguished, economic activity that has suffered, and data seems to be pointing in completely different direction.
Supriya, it's absolutely absurd and outrageous to assert that we are fudging the data. The very fact that we are having this conversation on national TV with millions of people watching, and exactly as Mr. Yadav was saying, and Mr. Gowda knows very well, the whole world is watching. Under these circumstances, why would we try and vitiate our credibility or diminish our credibility by fudging any data? Anything we do in a democracy with full freedom of expression will immediately be exposed. So it is absolutely ridiculous to think that we would ever do anything of that sort. We have problems with our statistical systems. We have to constantly update them, upgrade them. We have to ensure that the data that's being put in is robust, it's statistically and scientifically reliable. So those things take time. They require revisions, they require adjustments, and we are in the process of doing that. I remember that there was a huge debate on the GDP back series initially when it came out, and our friends from the Congress in their Goebbelsian way, of course, were making the same charges then. But after all of the world's agencies ratified the data, validated the data, whether it's the IMF, the World Bank, whether it's the ratings agencies, everybody validated that, that whole noise has subsided. In the same way, the agencies will look at all of this data, investors will look at all of this data, and if it is wrong, they'll reject it, and that will actually hurt us and damage us. But certainly we are responsible and mature enough to understand exactly how the world works and how the world looks at data. So absolutely there is no question of fudging the data or manipulating the data. This is the standard adjustment, this is the standard back and forth that happens when complicated data series are looked at, they are analyzed, and they are done in a completely transparent way. Whether it is the NSSO, whether it is the GDP back series, all of these data are done in a very transparent way. They're looked at by scientists around the world, and then the world comes to a conclusion around all of this. So I would absolutely reject what other panelists are saying as far as this is concerned. And I also want to come back to what Mr. Gowda was saying about the poor, the defenseless, the most vulnerable. In fact, that is exactly what our government has been doing.
Right.
We are talking about the Pradhan Mantri Kisan Yojana right now. We are forgetting about all the other things we've done. You can go to the poorest, most remotest villages, as I always do, and every house in that village is going to have electricity, it's going to have a toilet, it's going to have running water, it's going to have a gas cylinder, it's going to have a bank account. All of these things we've delivered. to the most defenseless, the most vulnerable populations of this country. That is in fact the whole Antyodaya objective of our government. So certainly we are doing all of those things. We have to look at this particular support program as one among a bouquet of programs that has transformed the lives of the poor.
All right. On that note, I think I will have to take a really quick breather here. I will be back and we will put the spotlight on the other SOP that has been offered, and that is tax SOPs for the middle class. Rajiv Gora is raising his finger. Okay, very quickly, sir, 30 seconds before I take this break. I really have to. Money has to keep flowing in for these shows to go on, but go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Sinha has to point out that what happens to all the data that is not even being collected anymore? Do we know the number of farmer suicides in the last few years? You stop collecting that data. Where's the data on jobs themselves? You know, the last labor survey was when the 5-year surveys are not being conducted again, and you've come up with something new, and that itself is showing how bad the situation is. So basically, when it comes to data, which is inconvenient, this government is playing tricks and games. In light of
I'm sorry, I'll have to come in there. Okay. I will have to come in there. I don't think we can afford to make this a data credibility issue, a data debate. Maybe we can reserve that for another day. This is a budget debate. I still have very important things to talk about. We'll be back in just a minute. Please do stay with us. Minister Sinha, Swami, Yogendra Yadav, and of course Rajiv Gora. Please continue to be with us. I'm back in just a moment. Okay, let me quickly take this across to Mr. Jayant Sinha, and let's begin this round on tax talk. Mr. Sinha, one of the allegations that has been raised against your government, and again by the principal opposition, is that for a government that's laying office in 4 months, why did you have to go ahead and make changes to the income tax side? Why did you have to change direct taxes? That is one part of my question. So why did you have to do this? And the second part of the question is that, the middle class is extremely vocal, and the middle class is going to benefit from this. Will they be swayed to vote for you? And is this a reward for how they have grinned and borne, whether it's the GST or the demonetization or even very high fuel prices, where ideally there should have been some respite?
Supriya, we are winning this election and we are going to be forming the next government. And in fact, as you know, our slogan is Ab ki baar 400 par. So of course, because we are going to be forming the government, we want to be able to tell people what we are going to do. And one of the things that we are going to do is to provide tax relief to the middle class, which is exactly what we've signaled through the budget. And we have said that you're going to be able to get to not just 5 lakhs, but probably 7-8 lakhs by the time you add in all the exemptions and deductions before you have to start to pay taxes. So that's a very clear indication that we're giving as to what our tax policy is going to be when we are back in government. Now, with respect to whether it's going to translate into votes or not, that is for analysts like you or for others to decide. But as far as what I can sense, and I've already got many calls from Hazaribagh, from my constituency, people are really thrilled about what we've done in terms of the middle class tax relief package that we've offered. And by the way, Supriya, the very important thing to again understand here is that we've been doing this consistently. Remember that the slab was at 2, we made it 2.5. Then we took the 10% rate from 2.5 to 5, we reduced it down to 5%. We've increased the exemptions, we've increased the deductions. So there has been, in fact, a concerted attempt, a continuous attempt over the years to be able to provide more and more tax relief to the middle class taxpayers. That being said, remember, everybody is still a taxpayer because of indirect taxes, and even as far as indirect taxes through GST are concerned, we brought those rates down very significantly as well. So this is really the magic of what our policies are demonstrating, which is we are bringing down tax rates while at the same time increasing tax to GDP. It has gone up from 16 to 18%, and we are doing that because we are increasing the tax net. The number of taxpayers has gone up from 3.8 crores to 6.8 crores. So we are improving compliance, and I will have to say that demonetization was a crucial element of that, because that has fundamentally changed taxpayer behavior. God. It's fundamentally changed compliance, and that's part of the reason why tax collections are going up.
Okay, I didn't know people would still talk about demonetization favorably, but since you are, let me take this across to Rajiv Gowda. And Professor Gowda, direct tax collections jumped from 6.38 lakh crore rupees in fiscal year 14 when you demoted office to almost 12 lakh crore rupees now. I am no fan of demonetization, and I say that on public television and on national TV. It had its ills. GST had its share of glitches. But do you concede that perhaps both of these things have helped formalize the Indian economy, have helped formalize and expand the tax base? And the question also is it going to be impossible for anybody else who's voted back, even if it's the Congress party, to roll back these tax breaks?
See, we would have achieved this kind of tax compliance on both direct and indirect tax fronts because of the way the system was evolving. As you brought more and more people into the formal banking sector, as the GST ensured that tax evasion was eliminated because of, with the way you claim tax deductions, etc. Basically, and with the other advances in fintech and the ability of people to use PayATM and numerous other, financial instruments, basically, we were going in this direction in any case. What demonetization did was just act as a surgical strike on this economy. That's their big contribution, and slow down the economy, ensure that large number of jobs were destroyed, that the informal sector was shattered, and then those people who are still left earning some income, now they're giving them a little bit of a tax break promise. It's not something that's actually delivered and will not be delivered unless a new government comes in and actually votes it in. So basically, there is, so just like they keep offering breaks to startup companies, when they're not going to have tax implications at all for the first 3 years practically, you say, okay, we'll give you a 3-year tax break. That's the sort of stuff. It's just, again, smoke and mirrors. Unfortunately, what the trajectory of the economy is in the direction of formalization, of more people getting into the actual tax net directly and indirectly, and therefore I don't think that demonetization or any of these measures have any positive contribution, quite the contrary.
Right. All right, Jensen, before I come back to you, Swami, a quick question to you. The government estimates to get a dividend of 82,911 crore rupees from the RBI and also the PSU banks next fiscal, and a very, very handsome sum of 80,000 crore rupees from the divestment proceeds. Talking about the budget math, isn't that number far too optimistic? I mean, banks are just about coming out of the dark zone that they have been in, or do you believe it's the change of guard at RBI that's igniting hopes here? Swami? Yes.
Oh, me? Yes. Oh, sorry. Yes, there is some question mark. There is a question mark because even if you look at the disinvestment so far, a lot of it has been the LIC buying the shares of government in something else, or one public sector undertaking like IOC buying HPCL shares. This is not actually revenue of any kind. This is just a juggling around of the government's own assets, which is therefore then being shown as some sort of revenue. So that is smoke and mirrors. The RBI dividend, when the RBI gives a dividend, frankly, it is the equivalent of printing money. It's a monetization of that particular process. I would say that whatever you have done in the last year, if you continue to say that the LIC is going to buy shares or one public sector undertaking is going to buy, you will meet the disinvestment target. But if you mean a genuine thing like selling to the public, it has not happened last year, and it's not clear to me that it's going to happen next year. I must add that, the CAG had said that there's a lot of smoke and mirrors even in all these fiscal deficit figures. There is so much off-budget borrowing. I mean, over and above this, as I said, juggling assets between the central government and the PSUs, large sums being borrowed off-budget, including 100,000 crores of overdues to the FCI. So, all of this is going to be putting pressure on the bond rate. Remember, the bond rate at one time people thought was going to come down to about 6.5%. It's now about 1 percentage point higher. And it seems to be that this emphasis on consumption, of doling out money, is going to put further pressure on that. Our real interest rates in the economy are extremely high. And they are not high just because of the repo rate. They are high because there is some crowding out going on of private investment. So we are damaging some long-term prospects in order to have an election budget.
I think you're tempting me to ask a quick question on pure numbers to Mr. Sinha, because, you know, he's somebody who can talk on that very well. And Mr. Sinha, Swami was talking about the real interest rate, borrowing targets. And I don't want to get too technical here, because I understand the people watching this show right now want to see the big picture. But without getting technical, you're looking to borrow 2 lakh crore extra in next fiscal. So that's going to push up the interest rates. And also, sir, as far as investments are concerned, capital expenditure growth that was budgeted at 10% this year is now at, the growth has now been revised down to 6% for next financial year. I'm presuming in the real budget it's going to be revised even lower. If private sector is not investing, can the government engine of growth and investment pull out at the same time as well? And what will this mean for economic activity?
Supriya, it's very important to understand debt dynamics, to understand the overall fiscal position of government. As far as the debt dynamics are concerned, you've got to recognize that debt to GDP overall for government, and this includes not just the central government but the state governments as well, that number has been very steady over the last few years, and we are trying to manage that down to a very reasonable number of around 40% debt to GDP for the central government at least. And so we are very, very sensitive, we are very vigilant when it comes to the debt dynamics and the debt consolidation. We recognize that if government yields are going up, then it's going to impose even higher borrowing costs for the budget, and so we are very, very careful about how we manage our expenditure, and that is exactly why we are keeping the fiscal deficit at 3.4%, so that we can start to bring down debt to GDP, bring down our borrowing rates, as well as bring down borrowing costs. So we are managing those debt dynamics very, very carefully, and we understand the numbers extremely well. The reaction today in the government yield markets was quite positive. There was no increase in yields to the best of my knowledge. In fact, I believe they went down somewhat. So there you're getting the first-hand reaction from the markets on how they see the debt dynamics playing out. In fact, I think the markets had probably priced in not a 3.4% fiscal deficit number, but probably a much higher number, because they had seen what the UPA had done in the past with election budgets and as far as their fiscal deficit is concerned. But we have maintained our well-deserved reputation for fiscal prudence through this budget and all of our previous budgets as well. You know, I also want to go back to something that Professor Gowda said, and I must say that Professor Gowda was a very distinguished professor at IIM Bangalore, and of course a very devoted researcher and scientist. And it's very distressing for me to see that his association with the truth has become so tenuous as to make the statements that he was making earlier. And I'd like to point out, to my friend Mr. Gowda, to go and take a look at the numbers and see what the tax to GDP ratio was during the UPA time. I have the numbers right here. The trend was actually negative. We were looking at 10.4% tax to GDP numbers, and they were declining during the time of the UPA because of the very poor compliance record that they had. We have completely turned that around, and demonetization has been in fact a very important part of that, which is why today we are looking at 12% tax to GDP as far as the central government is concerned. So we've completely turned it around through a variety of things we've done as far as tax policy is concerned, as far as demonetization is concerned. So I would request Professor Gowda to go back again.
Mr. Sinha, it will be very difficult.
Of a dedicated researcher.
Mr. Sinha, please let me come in. I think it's going to be extremely difficult for you to convince the three of us on this panel on demonetization. So I agree with most of what you said, but on demonetization, I think it's going to be a tall ask. I'm not going to be convinced, and I will ensure that the other two are not also. But let me quickly,
Supriya,
I have to get closing comments.
If you permit me to interject, for just one quick second. Permit me to interject
No, give me a minute. I have to
Anybody
close this
who has a firm view on demonetization right now is not a scientist, is not fact-based. That's all I can say.
I'm not one, and I have a very firm view on that. But give me a minute.
I think Jayant should go campaign on the plank of demonetization, and then you will see the reaction.
And I'm coming to you, Professor Gowda. Okay, Professor Gaura, I'm
Mr.
coming to you. You can bundle that with a quick answer here. We have to wrap this up. Do you have an alternate roadmap in terms? We will all get together. We will analyze the budget, decode it, criticize it if you're in the opposition. But does Congress have an alternate plan to alleviate farmers' woes, generate jobs, bring back the animal spirits? Because minimum income guarantee is going to take care of just one part of India's economy and India's problems, but there are many others.
Yeah, we are at work on our Congress Party manifesto. Mr. Chidambaram is the chairman of the committee. I'm the convener. We've gone around the country, generating ideas from a variety of stakeholders and publics, and we are in the process of coming up with that plan. So it will be announced when we are ready to announce that. But let me just point out that Mr. Sinha should go and campaign on the basis of demonetization and say that was the biggest thing that this government has done, which is the truth, and then we shall see how the people reward that kind of frankness with the true verdict that matters at the polls.
Okay, a last word, and obviously the last word will be Swami's. And Swami, what I didn't miss in this budget speech was the reference to Gau Mata, and that reference was made twice over as things were being wrapped up. 750 crore for the Rashtriya Gokul mission. I have no issues with Gau Mata, for people who believe and practice respect for them, but the Rashtriya Kamdhenu Ayog, eventually, when the battle 2019 unfolds as it will in another 2-3 months from now, is this eventually going to boil down to optics like these? Will budget numbers, job generation, fiscal deficit, and all of that get discounted?
I think I must add in this respect, if only the BJP enfranchises cows, its chances of election victory would increase a great deal. But over and above that, you find that even Mr. Kamal Nath says he's going to finance 1,000 Gaushalas in the next 3-4 months. These are some of the somewhat zany paths we have gone off onto. But as far as the budgetary thing is concerned, I think the really big picture is that India is still on track. We have various criticisms, but India's macros overall still look quite decent. When you look from Washington, D.C. at the world as a whole, India remains the fastest growing major economy. There are a large number of individual problems, but there is nothing wrong with its inflation rate. Its current account deficit is within control. The fiscal deficit could be lower, but it's not that bad. So the overall picture of India is quite a respectable one, seen internationally. But let us see what happens. A large number of state governments are now going to come out with their budgets. Right. Will they also be populist? Will that go through the ceiling? Will the combined fiscal deficit go through the roof? That is what we now need to look at.
On that note, completely out of time here, but can't thank this wonderful panel enough. Jayant Sinha, Rajiv Gaura, and of course Swaminathan Iyer, and of course Yogendra Yadav, who joined us a while back, for being a part of this discussion. I think verdict 2019, as far as the budget is concerned, is out. Swami's final rating continues to be 6 on 10. Am I right, Swami?
I think I'd revised it.
Okay, he's revising it a little upwards. So 5.5 out of 10. Okay. But the reality is that this was an important exercise. This was an important risk factor as far as India's economic landscape is concerned, market movement is concerned. But guess what? The biggest risk of them all, the battle 2019 is ahead of us. Budget was an election budget, and this was bound to be one in an election year. Let's see who wins the battle of 2019. Thank you very, very much, gentlemen, for being with us. We take a quick breather. There's plenty more that's coming up right here on the show, including an exclusive interaction with Finance Minister Piyush Goyal.